Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 17 with Krystal Mack.
When you asked me to be on, I was like, yes, absolutely. But then I was like, but am I a chef? And then I realized, I was like, yeah, I am a chef. And that's something I constantly struggle with a lot, which is part of the whole decolonization process, because we have this very, or we're conditioned as food people to have this very colonized view of like what a chef is, right? It's like a chef wears a chef coat. Oftentimes they have a little hat.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category as I started my personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 10 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've never worked in a restaurant unless you count Burger King. This week, we have Krystal Mack. She's a culinary artist, creative consultant, entrepreneur, writer, self-taught baker, and activist who uses food as a vehicle for storytelling, cultural exchange, and community building. Based in Baltimore, Maryland, she's launched multiple brands and concepts over the years, including an experimental frozen dessert concept, Baltimore's first ever food vending tricycle, and an artisan collective for creatives of color. In this episode, we talk about using food as a tool for social design, decolonizing our relationship with food, imposter syndrome, culinary traditions, ethnic food and classical cooking, collaborations, food influencers, and so much more. And I wanted to mention that during the show, Krystal had an incoming phone call, so there's a spot that seems to abruptly end and then start up somewhere in a kind of unrelated place. I want to clarify that we didn't cut her off when she seemed to be talking about her Patreon. We do get into that a little bit again at the end of the show, but just wanted to mention that. And thanks to this week's sponsor, The Grotto in Baltimore, for letting us record the episode in the studio. And if you enjoy the show, I'd really love for you to subscribe to it, and if you're on iTunes, give it a rating and a review. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
Welcome back to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm Andrew.
And this is Chris.
And we're here at The Grotto in Baltimore. Our guest today is Krystal Mack. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're glad to be here today.
Yeah.
I guess just let us know, who is Krystal Mack? I could sit here and introduce you. You're part of a lot of cool projects and you've done a lot of cool things, residencies, businesses, all types of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I am a proud Baltimore native, and I guess, this is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast, so I am a chef. I'm a chef, but mostly a social designer that uses food to kind of engage with issues facing us as people in the society that we live in, political issues, emotional issues, anything of that nature. I like to use food as a way to tell stories around those specific themes. And I arrived at that profession after just kind of feeling disgruntled with my place in the traditional food industry, so like hospitality in all capacities. As a business owner, as a line cook, as a front of house person, just really trying to find a way to find my place in those roles in hospitality, and just realizing that I wasn't meant to be in hospitality, at least not in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how I came to exploring the idea of using food as a tool for design and social design. And pretty much my approach to social design, which is how we engage with one another, how to make human life better, is to decolonize our relationships with food. And for me, that's just been a huge process of my growth as an individual, as Krystal, as myself, just this whole decolonization process, which has been really interesting because, you know, I think we were just talking about how everything is so gray. It's like so much gray areas as far as like our values and the things that we believe in. Like no one is like entirely Black and no one's entirely white with like the things that they believe in. It's kind of like living in the gray. And that's how I feel that I'm just not even that's how I feel. I used to think I was very like firm in my beliefs and values. And then this whole decolonization process made me realize like, wow, like you too are a part of the problem, which is fine to have that realization. But also like now that you realize like, what are you going to do? And for me, it's always just been about living in my truth and walking away from things that didn't serve me and speaking out against the issues that I saw that were harmful, not only to myself, but to the vision that I had for the food industry that I wanted to see or the food community that I wanted to have or be a part of. So that is who I am.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if I rambled on a bit, but that's who I am.
No, this is definitely a pretty good explanation. And it really seems like with that, you're kind of like, I don't know what maybe influences you have or who inspired you, but it seems to me like you're just carving a completely new path in the food industry that I'm not like an expert or anything, but I've never seen anything like it before, you know?
Thanks.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, the funny thing is when you asked me to be on, I was like, yes, absolutely. But then I was like, but am I a chef? And then I realized, I was like, yeah, I am a chef. And that's something I constantly struggle with a lot, which is part of the whole decolonization process, because we have this very, or we're conditioned as food people to have this very colonized view of like what a chef is, right? It's like a chef wears a chef coat. Oftentimes they have a little hat, not maybe anymore, but, you know, mostly in French kitchens, but they have the chef's coat, they have the apron, they're working in a restaurant traditionally. They work on the line. They have people that report to them on the line. You know, I was thinking of this very like traditional, very colonized view of what that looks like. But then I realized that that didn't apply to me and that was fine. But that doesn't, you know, in my mind, I was like, well, I'm not a chef and that's cool and that's okay. But then I was also like, well, actually, you are a chef. You're just not a very like colonized version of a chef, which you should be embracing. You shouldn't run away from that title. I was running away from it for so long. And I think in 2020, I was like, no, you need to like stand in your truth and stop running away from how people can understand what it is that you do. And that's when I was like, which is now, this is like the first time in a long time, I was like, I am a chef, yes. And I guess even when we go back and replay this, you'll probably hear some hesitation in me saying, I'm a chef. Because I still am getting comfortable with that. And also understanding that I can hold the title of something, but not present in the traditional way what that role would normally look like to people. And even in claiming in that is an education for myself and for others to see. Like, you don't have to be in a restaurant to be a chef. You don't have to operate like a large catering operation. You don't have to have a team that you lead on the line. It can be very much an intimate experience where you're engaging and educating the public in ways beyond consumption in a dining experience.
Well, that's why I wanted to start this. You know, I never took a traditional path. So I went to culinary school and I have a 4-year degree, but then I started doing things like working in retirement communities. I cooked at IKEA. But like when people would say, what do? You'd say, I'm a chef. And they'd get this excited look in their eyes. And like, ooh, where? And it's like, I work at a retirement community. And then it's like, oh. Like they want to hear this story. Like in their mind, a chef exclusively worked in this like Michelin star restaurant. And I've worked at some really cool places and done some great stuff. And some of it was almost like me, I don't know, like reconciling the fact that I was a chef, even though I didn't work in restaurants, but I consistently felt like I wasn't a chef because that's how people outside the industry made me feel about myself. But then I'm 43, so I see a lot of people my age kind of like aging out, right? Like they're not working till 2 a.m. and they're tired of all that. And they're doing these really cool things. And I really wanted to have a place for all of us to connect, maybe commiserate, help each other out, especially as so many of us are solopreneurs. but also to tell these cool stories and maybe inspire some younger people and make them rethink, like maybe you don't need to go to culinary school. Maybe you're not meant to ever work a line in a restaurant. Like there's so many awesome, cool things out there. Yeah. And with the podcast, I wanted people to come on and share their stories. And I'm not interested in having line cooks at restaurants. I mean, we've had some and we will, but I'm really interested in people telling a story of like what they're doing in the food world that does not relate to working a traditional restaurant job.
Yeah. I feel like that is the thing about, I don't know, the industry in itself. I feel like it draws so many different types of people, but I find that once you enter into that industry and then you kind of work through it, like you said, you either age out, or you're just kind of fine where you are and you don't really go beyond that, or you start to kind of question, like, is this it? Is this all there is? Like, how can I create more for myself? And oftentimes, unfortunately, especially from my own personal experience, as a Black woman, it is hard to kind of work your way up to the top. You know, we get less investment for businesses. So the likelihood of like starting at a restaurant and like working your way up to executive chef, and then someone seeing your talents as executive chef and being like, hey, I want to invest in you and help you open a restaurant. That is very rare when that happens. And, you know, so to me, it's always been like, okay, I got to make my own way. I got to make my own opportunity. I've always kind of been very much aware of that. And I think that's a cool and beautiful thing about being in food today, right now. Like a lot of us are just kind of creating our own communities and kind of showing what we want to have, what we want the future of food to look like. And it definitely is I don't know, I think it's just a really exciting time. And I'm really honored to be doing what I'm doing now at a time where, you know, change is being accepted and different approaches aren't immediately like looked at in a way of like, what is this? This is too weird to even be considered a food job or a food career. But I don't know, it's been really exciting.
Yeah. I think there still is a level of that going on, but that's kind of the whole reason that I approached Chris and wanted to do this, is to like let us in the industry who are actually making food define, you know, like what it means to be a chef or just navigate how we see fit, you know? And like me personally, I have imposter syndrome. Chris made me feel a lot better about it when I first met him, but like I don't have any type of formal training in cooking at all. I mean, well, in high school I took commercial foods, a couple classes. Shout out to Chef Zachman. He might even listen to this. I don't know. But you know, like I didn't even really work in restaurants. I didn't work in restaurants. My first job was in high school at a cheesesteak place, and then I was like, well, I'm gonna go sell weed because that's more profitable. And then my next kitchen job was literally in a jail. Wow. And then that's like, I mean, that's not my whole journey with food, but that's like where it really started. And, you know, I'm kind of like starting from scratch. So I have this imposter syndrome of like, how can I call myself a chef, where I'm like, my experience is totally different than most people who would say that they were, but it's really like about self-education and what you do with it. You know?
Yeah.
So
I think that's the thing we've taken away from, I feel like when we look at these very like these systems and these structures that have kind of these very like narrow views of like what something is supposed to look like, it creates imposter syndrome, which is actually its intention, because if there was no imposter syndrome, then everybody would be out here doing whatever they wanted to do, and that's not good. If everyone's doing out here whatever they wanted to do, then there would be an oversaturation, and then there would not be a way for a very small percentage of people to find success and grow profit and make a lot of money. So, and I can't believe you have imposter syndrome. I mean, obviously I do. Like it happens. I was like, oh my God, like no, your stuff is beautiful. But I think that's another thing. Like when we talk about like creativity and you know, people saying, oh, like you're a creative. Like I wish I could be creative. I think everyone is inherently creative. It just takes a little bit more work for some people. Just like I think everyone, I don't care what anyone says, I think everyone can cook. I'm not saying everyone can cook amazing things all the time, but I definitely think that everyone is born with the ability to like boil an egg, right?
I agree. I think
To
most
an
of the
extent.
boundaries we set ourselves. People say they can't cook, but really, like, if you just tune in, you can do a lot of things intuitively. Actually, that's something I kind of wanted to bring up with you today. You talk about it sometimes, is vibrational cooking. And that idea, I don't know too much about it, but like I understand it, and the idea of it to me is like the most beautiful thing, because I feel like that's kind of like what I've always been, because I don't have the training, you know what I mean? So like that's what I do. I don't really follow recipes or anything.
No, that's. I mean, it's a human. It is truly like you said. It's like an intuitive thing where it's basically like cooking off of instinct, cooking off of until like things just feel right. Like the vibes in the kitchen are okay. Like this is good. I don't think I need any more salt, or let me turn this heat down a little bit. And a lot of times I feel like it's about trust, right? It's like about building trust with yourself, with your senses, which are very important things for a cook or a chef to have. And I think it's interesting now we're in a time where it's so weird. Like we have this like praise of chefs, but then we also have the celebration of very like highly skilled home cooks, like Kenji Lopez and Samin Nosrat. So it's like these people are home cooks, and they're being like celebrated like any other chef. It's because they have not only the research behind them, but they also have these highly attuned skills of vibration cooking. In order to know how to apply the research, they have to have that trust and ability to know how to, I think this is timed right. I think this is seasoned right. I think I can I think this is enough time on the blanch. I don't need a timer. Like I don't need to be restricted by time. I can just feel it. I can tell it looks okay. It looks fine now. But that truly is kind of what vibration cooking is. And I think it takes on a whole different level when you are cooking foods of your ancestors, of your specific culture, of your family. I think that, that return to vibration cooking, which I'm seeing a lot more now, especially in the Black community, is really important for the future of food. I feel like we're getting further and further disconnected from understanding how important a connection to the land is, and a connection to the stories tied to food, and why we eat the things that we eat and why we don't eat the things that we shouldn't eat or we kind of have an aversion to. And I think that, the more that we practice vibration cooking and the more that we read about our food history, the more we know about ourselves and the more we can relate to others around us, because there's so many connections in food. Like my boyfriend always talks about how everybody has a taco. He's always talking about that. He's like, falafel, taco. Like, it's like, it's the same thing. Like, sandwich, kind of a taco. It's just so funny. But he's like,
is this going to turn into a hot dog's a sandwich? Because we can't even go down that road.
A hot dog's kind of like a taco too, if you think about it.
I mean, it kind of is. It's like some type of starchy vessel with meat and vegetables or something in it, or some type of some type of substantial item in the center that is being delivered to your face. And I'm like pizza.
Similarly, everybody has a pizza.
Everybody has a pizza. And it's just like, it's just really cool. So it's easy. It's fun to like explore those intersections of like, oh, we have this in my culture. It's called blah, blah, blah.
And so many of those terms are interchangeable.
Yeah.
And I find when I'm selling a menu to a customer, like I try and get the vibe on what cuisines are they deem appropriate. Like some people say, I don't like this or that, but take something like a chimichurri is very similar to a salsa verde, which is also similar to a green harissa.
Yes.
And they're all like this puree with like herb and acid and some stuff. And I know people will say like, I don't like Middle Eastern cooking, so I won't give them a green harissa, but I can sell them on a salsa verde. Or if they don't like Mexican food, I can sell them on a chimichurri, but it's essentially the same thing. It's like I throw herbs in the Vitamix with usually vinegar and or lemon and blend it up with some kind of spicy pepper. And it's just really funny that people put themselves in this box of like, I don't like Mexican food, so I won't tell them it's a salsa verde. I'll just call it chimichurri, and they're fine. Yeah. And it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah. And like how much I want to educate people, but not educate. Like nobody wants to be talked to at when they're your customer. Like, it's hard for me to go to a customer and say, like, well, I made this chimichurri. I know you don't like Mexican, and it's essentially a salsa verde. Like, there's a very fine line there about, you know, like, kind of saying, well, they're essentially the same. And I know you say you don't like this, but this is essentially that. And, you know, finding that balance of, like, educating them without coming off as, like, holier than thou, I think.
No, I think that's one of the fun parts about the job, right? You know, it's like presenting new ideas to someone and then making them realize, like, what they thought, again, which was, like, very black and white, what they thought they did like or they didn't like, making them realize, like, oh, actually, I like elements of this thing and I shouldn't restrict myself. Like, oh, it's just that I don't like cumin. I didn't realize that was, you know, that's the thing that I don't like. Oh, okay, what is cumin? And then, like, exploring that a little bit more. So, yeah, I think that's cool. I think that's amazing. And I think one of the reasons that gets me so excited, like, the aspect of, like, vibration cooking and, like, finding things across cultures that intersect is, like, the way that it brings us together and makes us realize, like, yes, we are different, and that's a beautiful thing, but also at the same time, we're still human and we're still connected to each other. So, you know, if we can celebrate each other's differences, like, and see the beauty in them, then we could possibly be able to come together and create a food future that is inclusive and diverse, not only in, like, the racial and gender makeup, but also, like, in the flavor palette of what it could be, you know, and maybe finding a way to kind of reinvest in each respective community so that it can continue to remain vibrant. Yeah, that's so important. Yeah. Wow.
And I think, you know, it's really interesting to look at political climate and what's going on and how you have a view of a whole culture's food based on something going on in the world. And I'd like to think we're a little more progressive, but, like, growing up, we had a Vietnamese restaurant in my hometown. And I remember people saying, like, I'd never go to a Vietnamese restaurant because they were thinking about the Vietnam War, you know, but just that whole idea of, like, I don't know. So now we're going into this thing potentially with Iran, but like, you know, and there's so many people living here in this country, not, you know, who have nothing to do with that and running restaurants and stuff. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what the reception is from the public to things like that. I'm always interested in kind of seeing how those global issues cut when it comes down to it.
Well, America is just famous for wanting to remove politics from everything, but also wanting to benefit from the harmful politics that we have, especially when it comes to food policy. Like, that didn't stop people from eating tacos with all those kids dying in camps, you know? That didn't. So, like, we are very much, unfortunately, the food culture in America is very much based in, like, escapism and capitalism. And those are, like, perfect partners for a story that is very, like, whitewashed and removed from the really harmful and sad and tragic realities of what the food system looks like here. And yeah, I mean, this sounds like such a negative Nancy thing to say. I was like, nothing's going to happen. If anything, the thing that's going to happen is that people who are poorly informed about the, you know, which are, to be quite frank, is all of us, because we don't really know what's happening. We just woke up in like 1 a.m. and was like, he killed the defense minister over there. I think that what's going to happen is that, you know, we might have some like really, some really ignorant people making really stupid decisions about where they're going to eat or what they're not going to eat, based on poor political decisions that have been made. It's just going to be a continuation of what it's been for the past, you can say it's been 4 years, but it's been a much longer time than Trump's administration. Like, people making decisions based off of, like, again, their very much black and white view, and not really, like, trying to find the facts or decenter their own experience. Which is why we've had like a rise in hate crimes and stuff. So, unfortunately, and I hope that is not the reality, but if we're going off of past experiences in the past couple of years, that is what's going to happen. And that's not cool. And that's fucked up, for lack of a better word. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. It brings me right back to what you said about people being like, I don't like Mexican food, but like, I mean, anywhere you go, Mexico, their whole food program program. It's like
their food culture is so diverse.
exactly.
So
So it's like,
thing.
yeah, like what is it really that they don't like? Do they not like Mexican food, or do they have some type of prejudgment about Mexico or Mexicans because of some other belief or views that they have?
Well, and I know you've seen my thing on Facebook this past week. I had some customers, and I do customized menus for all my customers. So I sent them a questionnaire to find out what they like. And they said they wanted, quote, nothing distinctly ethnic.
Oh, Lord.
Which is,
well,
which,
you're not going to get any food,
right.
But
what they really wanted was a Eurocentric, French, Italian leaning menu, which is fine, but that's what comes down to what a lot of people think food are. When I proposed a menu, they ended up getting something that had Serrano ham, Manchego cheese, Marcona almonds. You know, they wanted classical French techniques, but that's not what they said. What they said was nothing distinctly ethnic. And I posted on Facebook, and I got some really thoughtful comments from people. I got a lot of snarky ones. There was some joking there, but that's another an area where, like, how much do you educate them and say, well, just so you know, you said you wanted nothing distinctly ethnic, but what I'm hearing is you want Eurocentric, traditionally classic type foods, and that's fine. And maybe that will help you articulate that better going forward. But, you know, in this modern food world, there's so much diversity, crossover. There's been so much colonization where ingredients travel back and forth. You know, is chocolate an ethnic ingredient? You know, because I had someone make a comment about, like, chocolate's an ethnic ingredient, you know, so it's just the view is like, I guess nothing Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American. Is that what ethnic is to some people?
But I think that's so hilarious because it's like you also, so that's the thing when I always talk about language, it's like language is so important. And I think it's also like being such a hippie, like the Virgo moon in me, that's very much like, no, we have to be exact when we say things the way that we say them. And obviously, like, that's not always going to happen. But, like, even when you said it, which was not, you said classic, right? You were thinking, oh, they must want more of the classic. And it's like, well, classic for who? Like, that's not classic to me. That might not be classic to somebody in West Baltimore. Like, who is that classic for? And what are we basing this off of? What's the baseline? And then that goes back to the baseline being European, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not reflective of everyone. And it's just like, we keep, like, and I'm also curious, was this a younger person? Or was this like someone like in their 20s?
They were actually about my age.
Okay.
You know, judging from the questionnaire, I thought that maybe they would have been older
person, right.
But they weren't. I mean, they have children, some young, actually both younger than mine.
Okay.
So I just think that whole idea of Michelin, because also in their thing they said we're used to Michelin dining. So
that's so
you know,
interesting because
but now Michelin,
you even know what that means because Michelin gave that street vendor a star,
right? And now
Now
you're having like they're even having like the best Michelin restaurants in Japan and in Mexico. But I just think people go back to that idea of like when I was in culinary school, you learned they called it classical French cooking. Like everything was rooted. It is very
French, but it's not classic.
and I am so not interested in that. Like I don't want to cook those. I'm not interested in French food. I'm not even really interested in that much of Italian food myself. But it's just interesting the way that the whole thing was like positioned as to what they liked and didn't like.
And I'm not shaming this person for their taste. I'm definitely not a person that y'all say but at the same time, it's also like, I think, again, like we can celebrate all those things without discrediting another, right? We can still say that I love pasta. I definitely have days where I'm like, I just want some pasta right now. Mm-hmm. Like, and if someone's like, well, we don't have pasta, but we have like ramen. And I'm like, nope, I want tomato sauce and pasta. Like, I'm not saying I don't like ramen. I'm not saying I don't like pho. I'm saying right now, I just want pasta. So I think there's a way to celebrate all things and also celebrate the opposites as well without holding something up as a pinnacle and discrediting everything else. And I think that we are at a time now where more than ever, we need to do those things. We need to celebrate the things that are not being centered, but also acknowledge that the things that are being centered have helped pave a way, in a sense. But also it's kind of time to like let some old traditions die, you know?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I didn't want to get too deep on your Facebook feed there, but one person that we know was like, I feel like when sometimes that's code for anything not European. I was like, no, it's not code. That's what that means every time somebody says it. Because I mean, like you were saying, like everything is ethnic in some way, but like the only person who's gonna say like I don't want ethnic food is like somebody who's has this Eurocentric view of the world that's just like this is classic. This is what it is.
Or they want ethnic food, but they don't even know that they want it. They want influences. They want fusion. They want all of those things. Like they want the David Chang ethnic experience, right? They don't want like your local mom and pop ethnic experience. And that's not to knock David Chang, but he definitely like, you know, there was like an Asian fusion movement in like the 90s, but then he like revitalized the infusion of Asian cuisine into American cuisine and made it way more like he's the reason we have kimchi ketchup and stuff like that, which is fine and great and amazing. But at the same time, it's also like, you know, if that is the only, you know, if you're only interested in ethnic foods that have a proximity to whiteness or that are approved by institutions that are inherently white, then that's a problem. And it's a problem because it is telling one story. And it is also like playing like who's bad and who is good. It's like passing judgment on certain types of things based on, you know, really problematic histories oftentimes. Like whether that's like model minority myths or like colonization of lands and people, like, so it's kind of troublesome. And I think it was so funny that the person was like, we're used to dining at Michelin stars. And it's like, well, yeah, you're used to dining at Michelin stars, but do you even understand the process of Michelin stars and how that works and the judging and how that works and what it takes oftentimes to get those stars? It doesn't cost money to get those stars, but it costs money in a sense in the ways that you don't even see as someone going into a restaurant space. That hospitality and that experience that you got, you didn't understand the amount of money that goes into like someone coming in and changing your cloth napkin every time. That's, you got to order fine linens. You have to pay for the person to get that washed. Then having someone coming around every 5 seconds to anticipate your every move, to give you a shawl if you're cold. Before you even thought about it, they saw you stroke your arm for 1 second. They're like, oh my goodness, this person's cold. Someone go get that. Clearing your plate. It takes a whole team of people, which is the reasons why that we hold in such high regard these like classic French restaurants, because they have literally, I mean, all of the roles that we have in traditional kitchens now are based and rooted in French tradition. They have this whole army of people, this whole team of people
who are quite often brown skinned, maybe not even English speaking people whose that's not their cuisine. So they might be cooking at Le Bernardin, but they're probably from Mexico or somewhere in South America.
And now, especially in like DC, but in like places where, you know, where that isn't the case, where there are kitchens that are full of young white people, specifically mostly men, young white men, they do have to pay them. And that costs a lot of money to pay that many people. So oftentimes what you'll find is that you'll have those people not being paid well, or they'll be paid well, but they'll be working in very like emotionally toxic situations and mentally toxic situations. So it costs a lot of money, whether the guest is experiencing that on their end at like a, $300 dinner. Like I said, that's like 10 courses or something. Or on the back end with the people who are working the line, someone's going to have to pay. You know, most of the time it's not the owner. So, you know, it's a lot of things that come into play. But oftentimes when it comes to Michelin stars, the people that have Michelin stars have the money to afford the Michelin star, because it is not cheap to create a dining experience that is that anticipates your needs. You know, it costs a lot of money to anticipate needs. And it takes a lot of time to find the right front of house staff that is attuned enough to anticipate needs and decenters themselves enough to kind of truly invest in the dining experience and forget about what they have going on and focus truly on the guests and the dining experience. So I think that was just so interesting that he was like, or I shouldn't say he, they were like, you know, we're used to dining at Michelin stars.
And I think it's really just what they mean is like they're meat and potatoes people. And then people use that expression all the time, like just classic steakhouse. Like I want a Caesar salad with like a filet mignon with some beurre blanc or, you know, something like that with a loaded mashed potato. Like that's what a lot of people want. And once again, that's fine. People go to steakhouses all the time. I'm not one of them, but like, you know, the people who you kind of talk about going out on Valentine's Day, you know, people who say like they're the ones who don't go out at all for a year and all they want is like
molten chocolate cake.
They want the molten chocolate cake or the cheesecake or something like that. And chefs always kind of dog on it as being boring food, but there's, you know, it pays the bills, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, just say you want meat and potatoes.
Which goes back to like not, you know, like it goes back to language and it goes back to, you know, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like there are things that we can appreciate about a molten chocolate cake. You know, not knock it in a, you know, a stuffed filet mignon or whatever.
I literally had a molten chocolate cake last night.
Yeah, like
from Domino's. Got it from Domino's.
So it's like, you know,
don't judge me.
No, I'm not judging. That's the thing. It's certain parts about our food culture that, you know, everything has its place, but examining the origins of what it is and if it still needs to come with us, right? Like, what does it contribute to the conversation? That's the only thing I think that we need to get better with, figuring out what can stay, what can go, and why are we saying it can stay and it can go? Is it because it serves us, or is it holding up this weird, like, false narrative about like what good food is and what good food isn't? And is it rooted in some type of weird supremacy that we need to throw away and dismantle now? So, sorry, I'm hogging.
No, you're good. We got you on here because we want to hear what you have to say. So it's all good. I have a similar thing with my pizza. Is like I've always wanted it to be like, I mean, my business in general. Like I started with a mission, but it's not like a mission-based business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's something that I'm like still seeking out, like trying to figure out where I lie when it comes to like community and like what I can do to give back through my business, you know. But like starting out, I don't know, it's kind of difficult to figure that out. Maybe it'll just come to me. But I've been trying to figure it out.
I think it's just constantly asking yourself what you need as an individual, and also what you, because I feel like if you ask yourself what you need as an individual, this is what's been helpful to me, because I'm still also trying to figure it out, especially as someone who is trying to constantly evolve and learn more about myself day to day. I feel like asking what you want for yourself as an individual, separate from Pizza Llama, you know, like I think that it's interesting that we oftentimes as entrepreneurs and business owners and creatives, we try to separate those two things. Like, well, this is like my business hat and this is my personal hat, but it's like the business hat is the thing that keeps you fulfilled as a person. So trying to figure out like, what are the things I want from my community that I may not necessarily be seeing, or, you know, what are the things that, you know, I feel like I'm missing? Like that was the whole reason that I kind of created my design studio in absence of, or studio IAO design. It was just kind of like, wow, I want to have a space where I can have these conversations with other food creatives or other creatives, period. That they don't necessarily have to be related to food in their day-to-day activity, because I know that we all eat food every day, right? So it's like there's always a connection to food. So it's easier for me to find that link to people. But you know, I want to have deeper conversations around like art and music and social justice. Like, how can I do that? And it's like, well, if I create it, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. Like, Field of Dreams. Like, if I create this space for myself to explore, and then put out there, hey, I've created this space. Like, if you want to join me, and have some conversations that aren't traditionally had in, you know, hospitality and food and beverage, then I'm here and I'm ready to talk about them. And, you know, engaging people in the programming that I create too. Those are the things that, you know, are kind of selfish. I create programs that I would want to see if I were not the one creating them. It's like, what would I want to go to right now if I didn't have this? I was like, I would want to go to a program about Black women, food, and power. So I made one. Yeah, it's just kind of like exploring your needs and then kind of going off of that
because I think that's how I found you. I mean, I knew about you when that one day you walked into our house. I was like, that's Pizza Llama. I know that guy. That's so cool. At one point before I like got in that space, I had made it my business to see how everyone else who didn't have a space was building community with food. And I had, I had a food tricycle called Pie Cycle, and I was also selling ice pops off of it. And that concept was called Karma Pop. But I was always just like fascinated, like across the country, with how other chefs were, running their mobile businesses and popping up in places, but also how they were sustaining community in between those pop-ups and like connecting with other people that got it. Because you can have friends who are chefs, but it's a really special difference to have friends who are who don't have a restaurant role every day. I think that they can understand the challenges that you face and the extra level of creativity and motivation that you have to get your ideas off of the ground, which kind of to me is why I'm always like extra hardcore cheering on people who aren't in a restaurant space, because it takes a lot of like extra work to survive and even be like seen or heard and taken seriously.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. And if you have a voice, I'd love to be able to use my platform, but we're definitely in a time where it's divided. You have a guy like Chef Tom Colicchio. He's very political, and he'll post something on Twitter, and then everyone not everyone, but half the country or people will pile on and say like, stick to cooking, chef, that you're only identified by your career or this one thing, and you're not allowed. He's got a lot of followers. He's got a platform, and he uses it to speak about things that he is passionate about. But a lot of that pushback will be, well, you're just a chef. Like you don't have the right to talk about that. But why are you an architect have the right to talk about that or something else? I find it bizarre.
I think of all people, I think chefs are the ones that should be talking about these things. Because we are so intimately connected to a medium that is about life and keeping people alive. And a key part of being alive is just thriving. It's one thing to be alive. Like if we were just concerned with just being alive, then it would just, which we're kind of headed towards, it could just be one of those things where it's like, have you guys seen the movie Soylent Green? So it could just be like a Soylent Green situation where it's like, it doesn't matter what we're eating. We're just eating people. Like, Soylent Green is people, but like, we're just eating and we're surviving, and that's fine. But we're not in the business, as human beings, we shouldn't be in the business of surviving. We should be invested in thriving, and that shouldn't be a business. Thriving should not be a business. It shouldn't be costing people money to live life pleasurably. In a way that they can find joy. It should be accessible to everyone. And I think that as chefs, it is our duty and our job to find a way, which is why we shouldn't yuck any yums or, shame people for their food choices. Find a way for people to find joy in their life in a way that's healthy, a healthy relationship to the joy of eating and cooking for themselves, for us to cook for them.
Yeah. So my question is kind of like, it's just another one of those gray areas where we're in a place now where in a lot of areas, it's like people need to be paying more for food kind of because of the service and the whole culture of tipping and just people in the kitchen being paid enough and all of that. Food is worth more than we kind of like as a society make it.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, when you're charging more for this food, then it becomes less accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, and me making pizza too, like I put a lot of work into my pizza. I use really good ingredients. Like I recently had a baker like kind of convince me. I never wanted to use the word like artisan or like, I was just kind of averse to it because I make pizza and I'm like, regardless if it's artisan or not, like it's pizza, and what it is like a poor man's food. Like that's where it started. Yes. You know what I mean? So that's why I was averse to it. But then she kind of pointed it out to me, like all the work you put into it and all the love you put into it and the crafts that you've honed over the years, like that's what it is, though.
Yeah.
And you can charge whatever you want for it, and people will come literally just for that if you call it that word. So I'm like kind of accepting it a little more now, but I've always struggled with that, because I want my pizza to be accessible to everybody, but it's just not really the case. Like, it can't always be, I feel like.
Yeah. I think there's tiers to it. The reality is, like, as an artist, you do want to survive off of your art, but at the same time, you want to survive in a sustainable way. So it's not always going to be accessible to everyone. But if that is a goal of yours, that's when you have that menu that is like, it fluctuates in the range of what you have. And also kind of keeping in mind, like, the relationships that you have with, like, farmers. If you're, are thinking about, okay, what are the things that, cost me more money to source, but I can actually, like, grow myself, like basil, I can grow my own basil. Like, okay, cool. That'll cut down on some things and, make this pizza a little bit more affordable to everyone, so I don't have to raise my costs because I'm outsourcing that. Or maybe you can have days that are like, oh, I'm going to go in this area that's kind of underserved and, offer a more reasonable price, or like pay what you can between these price ranges. I don't know. I think that, like, you have to think about, like you said, it wasn't like you have a mission, but think about what your mission is and think about what are the things that you really want to do with your businesses. And if accessible quality pizza to all is one of them, I think you can really start to think about ways that you can cut down on costs. I mean, that's really the main issue, it seems, when it comes to, like, making it accessible to everyone. What are ways that you can cut down on costs and make it easier for you and for your consumer, your supporters? But I don't know. I struggle with that too. And I think that's one of the reasons why I started my Patreon, because I was like, I want my programming to continue to be affordable. But I also know that the reason it was affordable this year is because I had a lot of grants from institutions, because I was doing these conversations and these programs at museums. So I was getting funding that helped cover the cost of speakers and helped, make sure that I was getting compensated for the time that I was taking out of my, like, months and year to plan this program. But I also know that I want to have, like, free range over the conversations that I want to have, and I want to have more radical conversations. And a lot of these conversations can't be had in the walls of an institution, but I also need to be able to afford the space that I'm renting. Right. So it's like, how do I do this? And that's when you can kind of have a real moment. I mean, that's what made me be like, okay, if people believe in the work that I'm doing, a little bit of money would help. So maybe I should ask, and that was one of my resolutions anyway. I'm not even a huge resolution person, but it was one of my intentions for 2020 was to not be afraid to ask the community around me what I needed. And what I needed was a little bit more sustainable support for a little bit more support in the financial department, so that the practice could grow, that people could continue to come. Because I didn't want to be like, okay, we're going to have this professor come and we're going to have this chef come, and it's going to be a very, like, fancy dinner after the conversation, $45. And I know last year the programming was free, but look, I got to pay for these people to fly in, and I got to, rent the facility, and I got to buy ingredients, and I got to pay my chef volunteers. And then it turns into a thing, and people are, the whole key part of this is building community and making sure that people are getting this education and information. And if I'm charging, that significantly cuts down on that. So yeah, the Patreon is a way that it'll allow me, to continue growing this community that I've started, and also continue the work with using food as a tool for design.
Well, that's awesome. We'll make sure there's, we'll plug that, and we'll put links in the show notes to get you there.
And we're just going to jump into a new conversation right now. I really wanted to talk to Krystal about collaboration. I've heard you talk before about it, and I mean, it was a while ago, I think. I just, I follow you closely on Instagram, so, like, I just take what I hear from that. But I know that it's, like, can be a complicated subject when you're working with another individual or a company, and then creating a situation where it's like a win-win for everybody, or like who's in control, you know what I mean? So I guess like personally, how do you navigate those type of situations?
I very rarely collaborate.
Yeah, that's a safe way to do
but
it.
not even in a weird way. I collaborate intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
I really try to think about what the benefit is to like me and as an individual, as the artist, but also like to like my design studio, and then also thinking about what that collaboration could bring into the community, whether that's like the target community that my business and the other business wants to address, and then the surrounding communities around that. I think that something that I see often, which makes me just kind of want to vom a bit, is like every 5 seconds it's a collaboration pop up somewhere, and it's like this takes away like the whole point of why this was cool in the first place. Like you're constantly seeing people. The thing that I see often in Baltimore is a constant recycling of the same collaborations and the same collaborators and partnerships, or one that has no real purpose. And it's just like clearly these people needed money. Like this was clearly like a thrown together last minute thing. So how is it that I can find something? We live in a time where there's so many pop-up concepts and mobile businesses. So it's like, how can I make my collaboration and my pop-up be substantial in that it is not a waste of the consumer's time, and it's not a waste of my time, and it's not a waste of my money, And I think that that's one of the reasons why I don't do them often, because it's like, okay, I have to find the right partner. I have to find someone that takes my work seriously, takes their work seriously, and is willing to put in the equal amount of effort to make this happen. Someone who respects business practices and wants to, if I present them with a NDA or a contract, yes, for a pop-up, they're not looking at me like, what? Why are you doing this? It's like to let them know that I'm being serious and I don't want my time wasted. And I think that contracts are important. I think that, especially in a collaboration, I think that, unique and original menu creation is important, especially in a collaboration. And I think that two businesses or two individuals coming together to value what both is bringing to the table is the whole purpose of it, and showing what can be created when two people who highly respect each other come together. That's like kind of the point of collaboration, what like amazing things can be created. If it's all about like a power flex or like trying to get in on somebody else's like shine, or maybe even like steal someone else's recipes, or like that doesn't, like, what's the point, you know? So for collaboration, I mean, again, I don't do them often, but when I do, I really like to sit and think. And in my mind, what I do secretly is I make a list of people that I'm like, oh, wow, like, I love what this person does. Like, I love Pizza Llama. How cool is he? Like, look what he does. Like, how could I work with this person? What's a way that this would actually, like, be beneficial to them, not a waste of time, not a waste of my time, beneficial to me, and, like, a way for everyone to come across, like, walk away from the event and be like, wow, like, I got to get to Frederick and try this pizza, or, whoa, like, I'm so happy that Krystal did this. It was really cool to, like, taste these popsicles inspired by blah, blah, blah.
Is it wrong to just want to get together and cook with people who you like and have a good time just for the sake of a good time? So, like,
No.
one of the reasons I wanted to start what I do is because I work by myself. I have a personal chef business. I have 0 people. And, like, sometimes I just miss being around people and having that connection like peers.
Yeah.
And, like, Andrew and I might get together. Like, we did a pop-up dinner one time. No portion of the money went to a charity. I don't feel like we were moving the needle socially. It was just like 2 people who like each other getting together, cooking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I get your point somewhat, but I also feel like a lot of these guys just get together because they want to cook with other people they like. And you see, one chef leave their restaurant and do a pop-up with another, probably because they're just like good friends and want to cook together. And also, sharing followers or fans, I think goes both ways. Like Andrew and I have totally different followers and demographics, I think. And I think it is good for me to get in front of some of his customers and vice versa. So
no, I'm not knocking that. I'm saying I think that's great, but I also am not going to waste my time turning that into an event if it's not done. I mean, I don't know about anyone else listening, but as a small business owner who does not have a space, it takes a lot of time to do that. I have to rent a space to make food. I have to go out and buy ingredients that are going to cost more if I don't buy them in bulk and in mass. So then I'm going to go out and going to spend more money on ingredients cooking for a smaller pop-up. It's not cost effective. I think it's great to like want to, and I think that's the business mindset switch over for me. It's like, which oftentimes does not happen in pop-up businesses and concepts. People are like, I'm just doing it because I love to do it. And it's like, yeah, but are you losing more money now at this point? There's one way you can collaborate, and it doesn't have to be a pop-up, and it can just be at your home chilling with your friends and cooking. But when you are turning it into like a public thing and you're making the decision to make it a way to bring in business and make money, like it needs to make money. Right. It needs to make money. Like you can't just pop up and like have fun with friends and cook and then lose money, because it's like that doesn't make it sustainable. You have to be strategic with how you collaborate. It just doesn't make sense to not. I don't know.
Does any of that go back to kind of like a non-quantifiable marketing though? Because this is almost the counterpoint to, I think, what our last 2 or 3 chefs have talked about, which is like, it takes money to make money, and sometimes you got to go do an event and do a pop-up and give away food just to get in front of people. Like these people maybe have never experienced your food, and you know it's going to cost you a couple $100 in food, but then maybe you're going to get them as a customer.
I mean, yes and no. Like you can do that in a market setting, right? Like you can do that at a farmer's market. You can do that. There are ways that have a higher return where you aren't likely going to lose money instead of just doing it as a pop-up. Like a pop-up is not a guarantee, especially when you are the person bringing in the audience. Like if you guys like did a collaboration at a brewery or something, and you know the brewery has no food there, but you know sometimes they have people that are hungry, and you guys both don't necessarily have the strongest following. That's a very high likelihood of a loss of money.
Yeah,
very high. And to me, it's like, okay, like if I sign up though for a market table, like at a farmer's market or something, yeah, you're going to have bad weeks where you lose money, but the visibility is there. You know, the possibility of like return customers is there. That's what I mean when I'm thinking about collaboration and being strategic, just making sure like this is actually worth your time and your collaborators' time. Because at the end of the day, like when you do these pop-ups in spaces, oftentimes like you won't necessarily get like the generous brewery that's like, oh, pop up for free. Oftentimes they'll be like, oh, you guys want to pop up here? Well, we get a portion of your sales, or we need you to pay this like vendor fee. Yeah. Knowing that they don't have the traffic flow, knowing that, you know, it's up to you guys to promote. If you don't promote, knowing that they have no intention of promoting your pop-up. Right. So,
or even like contributing to it thoughtfully. Yeah. And then it's not, to me, that's not a conversation. I mean, a collaboration. That's just.
But that happens so many times. And especially when you have people that are like, oh, we'd love to partner with you, or we'd love to collab with you. And it's like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Especially in the time of food influencers. Like, so, which to me is pure BS. I cannot stand the food influencer movement, because it is oftentimes people who have never worked in the industry a day in their life and have the money to and the disposable income to frequent all of these places and really create a narrative of like what food is like in a city, or what a food industry should be. But they get all of these like really tight relationships with chefs and, you know, restaurant owners just because they are taking photos of food. They have no real understanding of like the sourcing behind the food. They have no real understanding of the culture. And that's like in-house culture and also culture of the food being served. They are just there to get free food and also have friends, fake friends, like internet friends.
And I was saying,
I don't like it. I think it's disgusting.
A couple of weeks ago, I was talking online to a bunch of people. I said, food is a commodity. And they make it even more so though. Like if you look at their Instagram feeds, very rarely are there pictures of the chef, the restaurant, any of this. It's just the whole feed is like 3 burgers stacked on top of each other, oozing, you know, all this like kind of unicorn food, right? It's like this 18-layer rainbow cake that's spewing Skittles out of it.
Yes.
But there's very little, quite often, no times even tagging the chef, or, you know, they'll probably tag the business or something. And I just see these people at these events and they come in, they're not there for the, if there's an event, I go to a lot of food events where you see these food influencers show up and they could care less about whoever the speaker is, or if there's some kind of event, they're just there for the food and the photos, and they kind of swarm the tables, take their photos and bounce with no mention of the chef creating it, maybe the restaurant they're from, or even what that event was. They just want to go be first in line and get a picture of this lamb lollipop, and then bounce and get their free food.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of removing the food from the whole thing that goes into it. And that's what I find annoying.
I think the thing that is also annoying about it, so, I mean, I had a former colleague of mine who is a food influencer. And I say former because I had to have a conversation with him about how he uses his platform. He posted about, I don't know if you guys recall a few months back when there was that raid on the chicken factory where all of the immigrants were arrested. And he posted something about like food media in his story. He was like, food media should be covering this more, you know, but they don't ever want to talk about that. All they want to talk about is like their chefs in restaurants. And I was like, you are someone who goes to restaurants, pulls out your like little flash and takes photos of food. So I messaged him and I was like, you are aware that you are food media? And he was like, what? No, I go to restaurants and take photos of food. I was like, that is food media. And I don't think that we understand the ways that we are also complicit. I was like, you know, you are literally someone that controls the narrative locally, and you don't understand the stories that you're telling are not good and fair, and they are not the reality. He had a story not long ago about a couple of restaurants that actually did recently. It was a couple of weeks before. It's a whole crazy story. It was a couple of weeks before Bon Appetit had named a few restaurants here, like best new restaurants, one of the like finalists for best new restaurants in America. And he had also been contacted a few weeks before in the summertime by Bon Appetit to like, hey, like, can you come to this event that we're going to do at this restaurant in Baltimore? And I think it was for like food market, like Chef Chad Gauss or something. And he was supposed to come, and it was like sponsored by Tillamook ice cream. And it was like, he was supposed to come and like take photos and then also like pump it up and get local people in Baltimore to like show up to this Bon Appetit sponsored event. And he had shared that with me, and I was like, oh, are you going to go? And he's like, no, like, maybe I shouldn't. Like, I'm not really a fan of, like, that chef and, like, how he operates his business. And he had also just opened a restaurant that was, like, a very tacky, like, quote, take on Asian cuisine. And it was, like, a fake bodega in the front with, like, Wu-Tang blasting and, like, hip-hop posters all over the place. Obviously, it didn't last very long. I think it was open for 2 months. So he had chose not to go to this event, this Bon Appetit event. But he also then further like chose to support a restaurant group that has very problematic hiring practices, in that they don't hire any Baltimore natives and they don't hire any any people of color really. They have maybe 1 or 2 out of the 3 establishments that they have, maybe 4 people of color working front of house, and none of them are Baltimore natives, and they are occupying poor white and poor black neighborhoods. And he was saying how, like, he posted something and said how diverse they were, how diverse this restaurant group was. And, like, all these restaurants, they have beautiful spaces and they're so diverse. And I commented, this is all very true. These are so beautiful. These spaces are beautiful. I love the concepts this person creates. However, not diverse. That's all I said. And it turned into this huge back and forth about like me being negative and me not being supportive of local food business. And I was like, no, this is me just being honest about what's happening and not being in the back pocket of somebody that is giving you like free Japanese whiskey and wines and like, you know,
So to me, it's kind of like, but then like a couple weeks later or a couple months later, what happened? That restaurant group became a finalist of Bon Appetit magazine's, like, best new restaurants in the country. And I know how these things work because I've been contacted a number of times by publications like this. They don't come here. They ask the person that is an influencer in the area that has been a nationally recognized influencer, who are the people that we should check out in this area? And they will take that suggestion and then they will come down, do some research on it, come down, and then have an experience for themselves and be like, you know what, you're right. Best new restaurant. And that is what happened. They came down and they were like, you know what, best new restaurant. These places, best new coffee shop, best new this, that, and the other, with no real understanding of like the social, political climate of the city. No real understanding that, this young hipster concept has opened up in a poor Black community, and like what their like awarding of best new restaurant will now in turn do to people who are renting in that neighborhood, businesses or apartments or otherwise. And when I addressed to him, like, you don't understand what you're doing with your media platform as a food influencer. You're going around saying this is diverse and this is the best this, and you're talking about these like white male chefs, this, that, and the other, but you don't understand how you're a tool for these young hipster chefs. Yeah. And he got very much offended by it and was like, you're just so negative. You want to point out the negative in everything that we're doing or that anybody's doing. I'm trying to bring people together and highlight the least problematic people in the food community. And it's like, no, you're not. You're highlighting the cool, hip people in the food community. It's like, you can't, it's not always racial, but it is always like, it looks different every time. And so to me, I think that if we understood our power as influencers, whether that was chefs or food bloggers or whatever, all of us play a role in food media. And the thing that really grinds my gears about food influencers is that they're distorting the narrative of what good food is, what real food is, what chefs look like, and what hard work and diversity and inclusion look like. Yeah. They are the ones, especially when they're young, and especially when they're young and of color, they are the ones that are saying, this is okay. This level of inclusion is okay. This level of diversity is okay. And, they can come in, take a really beautiful, well-lit photo and get fire a whole menu, and then they can afford to do all those things. And then they can leave and just be like, oh, where to next?
But throw the food in the trash.
Yeah, and throw the food in the trash, or be like, where to next? And not really understand the toxic narrative that they've just contributed to, or the story that they've created now. That is not the reality of what this restaurant group or restaurant is actually doing in the community that they're in. So I hate food influencers. Yeah. I hate them. And I think that they need to be stopped. I don't hate them. Let me stop. I think they can do some good at times, but I do think they need to be more mindful with the things that they post and the things that they share. And I think they need to understand that they are the new food media. They're the reason why a number of local newspapers have stopped running food sections or have a very short, small food critique and review section, because no one is reading that anymore. Everyone's gone digital, and the place that they go to when they're trying to find the best new restaurant or the place to go when they want to eat is Instagram or Twitter or whatever. They're not going to Baltimore Sun eat section.
Yeah, and then that person, not specifically, but that influencer, by no democracy of the community or city they're representing, they get to be kind of the gatekeeper.
Yeah, and what does that also say when they are not from that city? Exactly. And they have no real understanding of
and that's the person
the
that
political
gets to pick
history
and
gets to pick and choose
who's on the
who will
spotlight.
find success in that city as a food business.
It's crazy.
If their idea of good food is centered in whiteness or a proximity to whiteness or European cuisine or a proximity to European cuisine, then that's a problem, especially in a city that is 65% Black like Baltimore is. That's such a problem. Anytime that someone who has control over who is successful or who finds success in the food scene is one not from there and has no real understanding of the issues facing people who are from a city like Baltimore, has control, that's a problem to me. And I do not
I don't know. It may come off as like a very nativist thing to say, but I think that if you're here, you should have an investment in the people. And if you don't have an investment in the people in the city that you've relocated to, then you don't have the right to have a voice to speak for them.
Well, and now it's becoming like corporate and unionized, because an influencer used to be someone who talked about things they liked and they did it for free.
Yeah.
And you listen to them because, you know, I respect Andrew, and if Andrew's eating at this place, but like, have you seen Zip Kick? Like,
No.
so I actually have their website up right now because like so many people, the tag is a global marketplace that connects freelancers, influencers, and consumer brands, and our satisfied partners, McDonald's, Rubio's, you know, but basically what you're seeing is Four Roses Bourbon. So now if you want to be like an influencer in the DC market, you go to Zipkick and you apply, and they connect you with a local Zipkick affiliate influencer who is building a team. So then you're basically on part of a team. And I know some of these people and have some idea of how it works. So now it's not just an individual going out, eating places, taking pictures of food and things they like. They're actually getting set up. And you have to go through a gatekeeper of whoever the local Zipkick, brand affiliate connector is.
Brand.
And you're basically now just being working for someone else. It's a media agency pretending to be true and authentic when really they're not. And now you're seeing these people going and posting food of some local restaurants, and then they'll do a sponsored post by McDonald's. And I've talked to some of these people and said to them, like, don't you feel that hurts your credibility? And the answer to me was, it pays the bills. Like when McDonald's put out the spicy chicken sandwich or whatever a couple months ago, all the DC food bloggers who are affiliated with Zipkick went and did sponsored posts for McDonald's. And it's like, in my mind, like, I would never do that to my brand. But I guess some people don't care and go for the money. I mean, I guess it pays the bills, right?
That's ridiculous. I mean, I didn't even know that was a thing. See, and that's what I'm talking about. Like the fact that people, I mean, that was literally what we were talking about on the break about, like, you know, making that decision of like, or making that choice of like, when I decided to do the Patreon and why I decided to do the Patreon, I get contacted often to do things like that. I get sent free stuff. I get sent, you know, gift cards here, but I have to like agree to like, they'll activate the gift card as soon as I agree to like share a post about where I went and did and like da-da-da-da and hashtag this, that, and the other. I don't do that because I know the power of my voice, and I understand, like, to them it's like $50 and they can just send me, but to me, I know what my voice is saying, and I know what that could then be a catalyst for.
And I'm going to go on record. I don't personally have problems with that. In fact, I'm hoping that some of the chefs in our organization can make true partnerships with business brands. I mean, I think it would be smart for if Andrew's already using this brand tomatoes for his pizza to do that. I mean, I've gotten deals. I posted something on Instagram and it had photos of like deli quart containers that I used to hold stuff in, and a company reached out and said like, hey, can we send you a box of quart containers and some money to your PayPal? Like, I was already using them anyway. It's not like me taking money from Coca-Cola, but I don't drink soda. So I still think there are ways to work with brands that you respect and like. And if someone wants to sponsor, I mean, we're always talking about, we're looking for sponsors for the show, and if it's the right person, the right brand. So, I just want to make sure I go on record now. I don't want people saying, oh, I know Chris took those deli container money and did a sponsored post. But
no, it's nothing wrong with, I think that's the thing, there's nothing wrong with partnering. And I think that goes back to collaborative mindset. There's nothing wrong with partnering that is beneficial to building your brand, whether that's like reach-wise or financially. But I think you have to think about what your partnership and what that collaboration says about your brand, I guess, if we're going to say brand, what that says about your brand, what that says about your mission, what that says about that company and why they want to partner with you. The thing that I think is problematic about the sponsorship of, which I can't believe that's a thing, like a food influencer posting about McDonald's, is these are the same people that will be like going to a Michelin-starred restaurant and talking about like talking about a local restaurant group and talking about how they treat their employees like crap. What do you think they treat their employees like at freaking McDonald's?
Like, and then you want to talk about how like
Preach.
you can't go from one farm to table restaurant and be like posting and talking about a farm to table restaurant, all these like very bespoke ingredients that they use, and then go post about McDonald's.
But I don't know that a lot of them do. I don't see a lot of really good food influencers getting into those places. I see a lot of.
I do, and that's actually one of my colleagues. The one that I was talking about was, I mean, if you're getting contacted by a national publication like Bon Appetit,
that's huge.
That is the reality.
But do you think they're more the rarity though for the high end? Because I see a lot of like a mom and pop shop opens like a new ramen place or a chicken and waffles, and then they get like a gaggle of food influencers to go in. And it seems to be kind of like they're giving away $8 chicken and waffles, but you're not necessarily getting comped a $200 Michelin star meal.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think they're getting comped it, but what it is doing is creating this like desire to want to become, this desire to want to go to this place without really understanding the practices of that restaurant, right? It's like creating this exclusivity and saying like, oh, this is cool. I want to go here. Like, how do I get there? Everyone's posting about this place now, but the reality is like they have very bigoted hiring practices, and they don't treat women well that work for their restaurant group. Like, but you've now created this narrative of like desire and like exclusivity. Like you can post all these things and talk about how great a restaurant is, but you have no, again, going back to influencers, not having any real understanding about how the industry works as far as like working in front of house or working in back of house or sourcing of ingredients. None of those things. They have no real concept. They just know that they can get that exclusivity and that cool factor of posting.
Most of them don't work in food or have a background in food. Like, and this isn't their job. It's extra money for them.
No, yeah,
and they work in IT or whatever, and they've never worked a day in their life in the food industry and know very little about what goes on behind the scenes and practices of those places. But it goes back to what you're saying about like taking grant money. You want to have the hard conversations and maybe some radical ideas, but if you're taking money from a company, they're going to want to limit what you say or what your guests say. And I think if you want to have true freedom to do what you want and say what you want, then you can't be beholden to anyone who's paying the bills.
Yeah, the unbought and unbossed? Yeah, as they say, like you just can't. There's no way to. I don't know. I think there are ways to be strategic with sponsorship and collaboration that can help grow a movement, but it won't necessarily further the movement, right? It's always like when people say like, can you dismantle a system from within? Like the answer is no. Like you kind of can't. Like you have to kind of step away from it. It's always like that. I created a piece of work around that idea called the Table of White Supremacy, and it was like a table of food, which each item on the table represented a byproduct of supremacy, and how at the end we all ate from the table because we're all complicit, regardless of whether or not we want to be or even if we know that we are. And to me, I created that out of always hearing like, we need a seat at the table. Ladies need a seat at the table. And it's like, I don't want to sit at this table. Like that's a very old mindset to me. Like this table was never created for me to sit at. And if I'm sitting here, there is something wrong with that. Because I don't want to sit at this table. This table doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve my people. It doesn't serve the vision that I have for the future. So how do I change things at this table? I can't. I have to walk away and I have to build my own table. Like there are things that I can take from my experience at the table and maybe like recreate, but oftentimes that's not really the best option. You just have to like go and create your own path. And I think that's like what we just talked about, like you guys creating the podcast and me doing the design thing. It's like, it's difficult, yes, but oftentimes to create the vision for the future that we have for our work and for food and for anything, we have to kind of go outside of the box and just create something that may not necessarily be new, but might be new to your respective community or just new to you. We can't just kind of keep doing the same thing and expect to get different results.
Yeah, I mean, one of my things, and Andrew's heard it over, and we've talked a lot about, is like this working for free and getting chefs to work for free. And I'll post things on our Facebook group, and some people basically say, like, stay in your lane. Like, if you don't want to do it, no one's forcing you to do it. But it's like, if no one holds these people accountable and pushes back, then nothing ever changes. If you year after year hold the same event and get people to work for free and nobody ever calls you on it, then they're never going to offer to pay you money. And this is the first time I'm starting to kind of come in an advocacy role and pushing back. And I wrote some letters this past month to some organizations saying, you know, I got the notices that you're looking for free food from chefs, and I want to put it back on you. Why do you think you don't have to pay them for their labor and their goods? And I feel like that was the spark, because then it did trigger other people in my organization to write the same letter to them saying the same thing. And I don't know that it's changing anything this year, but everyone was afraid of being blackballed. Nobody wanted to be the one to come out and say, I won't do it because of this. They just say, sorry, I can't. But like, there's power in numbers. And that's what I'm trying to do, is like standing up and saying, like, no, this isn't okay. You have this event every year and you want people to give away food for 800 people for free. No, that's not cool. And you shouldn't expect that. And do better. You know, it's a for-profit agency. It's not a charity. It's an event that's making money. So you need to be paying people for this. And I'm going to bang that drum. And some people are going to get on board, and some people, they don't want to speak up, but that's okay too.
I think that's why, I mean, I'm always saying, like, you know, with the whole exposure pay thing just blows my mind. And it's constantly people are saying, oh, well, this will be good exposure. Like, you should do it. It'll be good exposure. Now, granted, like, sometimes I do find myself like, all right, you know what, like, this would be good exposure, and I actually don't mind, and it is kind of a line, and sure, why not? But oftentimes, very rarely does that come across. Like, very rarely do opportunities present themselves in that way. And when they do present themselves, I really have to weigh it, because if you think about it, like, people die in the wilderness from exposure. Like, that's always how I think about it. It's like, people die from exposure. And that's literally what happens to a lot of these small businesses and pop-ups. Like, I remember seeing a video the other day online about this woman who had this tennis visor that she created for, like, when you're actively, like, playing sports out in the sun, and it protects your face. One day, this woman who was, like, caught up in a scandal, like, celebrity, she wore the visor, and her sales went from, like, nothing to, like, insane. Like, they were, like, went super through the roof. Her visor went viral, and it almost killed her business. So it's like, exposure, yes, can be good, but what happens is oftentimes these businesses are exposed, given high visibility, and they are not at a place where they can sustainably support themselves at that high level of visibility. And the thing that was supposed to help them is actually now hurt them, and this business goes under.
There was a restaurant, I think it was like a burger or something. I don't remember. Maybe it was Esquire. Like, it was a small place in the middle of nowhere, and like a food writer or something was like driving through town, and like, I had the best burger of my life there. And it went viral, whether it was Eater or Bon Appetit ran it or something. And I think eventually they went under, because then they had lines out the door. You know, it was like a mom and pop shop just doing like regular food. And then now they've got the best burger in the country, and there's lines out the door. So then they start running out of food, and then everyone's pissed. And then all the reviews come in and give them a 1 star, because I drove 3 hours to come to this place to get the best burger of my life, and you ran out of beef at 2 p.m. You should have expected that. But it was this thing, they weren't handled for that. Like, they blew up literally overnight, and I think they might have eventually closed. It was a couple of years ago, and you just see that thing, like, they just wanted to go out and do good food and have a business that sustained them, and too much of that exposure. And I think it was just like one piece that put them on the map. I mean, you know, I think as businesses, you kind of hope that you're going to get something like that, but you know, sometimes be careful what you wish for, right?
And that's one of those things where you just have to make sure that you are prepared. If you do take the exposure pay, sponsorship, collaboration, whatever, partnership, are you prepared for what this could potentially bring if it is successful in that way? And if it is successful in that way, do you have the foresight to say, okay, we have done enough, or okay, we're going to sell out right now, even though we have enough, we're going to sell out right now so that we can build up our reserves, our energy, our time, our ingredients, whatever, our resources, so that we can further meet this higher demand. Just being able to kind of like take control of your business,
so that you're not being overwhelmed and not being pushed to the point of exhaustion and depletion, business wise, and also like emotionally. That can be overwhelming. So,
for sure. This conversation has been amazing, super insightful, and very informative, and I'm sure interesting for the listeners.
All over the place. Sorry, y'all.
I think you have to go now, right?
Soon, yeah, I do have to go.
Okay. Sorry to the listeners, but we're not even gonna.
We can do that. I mean,
on the fly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it won't take that long, actually. All right,
yeah.
I'm gonna ask you some questions. Just answer them as fast as you can.
Sure.
And it won't take that long. So we're jumping right into it.
Okay.
All right, on the fly. What's your favorite tool in the kitchen?
Ooh, mandolin.
What's your favorite food to eat?
Ooh, bacon.
If you had all the monies, what's the first position you would hire for yourself?
Ooh, an accountant? That's boring and not fun. So yeah.
Who's your favorite chef?
My favorite chef. I would say I have not had their food, but one of my favorite chefs, like conceptually as far as what they do, is actually a colleague of mine, Omar Tate. And actually we've never formally met. I'll be meeting him next month at a dinner that he's doing, which will be my first time tasting his food. I'm so excited. But he has a dinner pop-up called Honeysuckle Pop-Up. And he's done some really amazing things in New York and Philly. And I will be at a hospitality conference, a food and beverage hospitality conference called Resistance Served. It's going to be in New Orleans on February 2nd to the 5th. And I will be there. And he's going to have the opening dinner on opening night. And his dinner series are really, are really interesting and innovative. And I love the way that he uses Black American food culture and history and incorporates it in his menu. And the preparation and the way that it's served is very like visually stunning. And he also does poetry as well, which speaks to me because I also write poetry and I like to incorporate that when I do dinners. So, I think he's really cool. Sorry, that was not a quick answer, but
no, it's totally okay. It needed the context. All the listeners.
Yeah.
Okay.
Honeysuckle Pop-Up is his Instagram, I believe.
All right, so art or science?
Both. You can't have one without the other. They coexist, and most people don't understand that, but they do.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
What's one thing you do differently from everybody else?
Ooh. Related to food?
Or not?
I am critical of others, but also very critical of myself. And I think that is not very visually aware. And I don't think I do it better than anyone, or I don't think I do it better than anyone else, but I think I don't do it like many other people. I think people think I'm very hard on people when I'm always talking about the things that are happening, but I'm even more hard on myself with the decisions that I make as far as like businesses I support or things that I do or don't do, or I follow through on goals and plans. So I'm critical like any Virgo would be, but I'm also very critical of myself as well.
Cool. What's your favorite digital tool?
Like app or something, or like my phone? What do you mean?
It could be an app. It could be a scale. It could be a thermometer. Like any digital tool.
My favorite digital tool would be the internet.
Okay.
Because it's highly, highly resourceful.
Can you recommend a book or a podcast?
Ooh,
That's
a
not
book. Oh my goodness. Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's not a cookbook, unfortunately, but she uses a lot of beautiful, flowery language about creating the future that we want, which can be applied to a culinary career or just social change around you in your respective community. And a podcast. I really love 99% Invisible. It's a design podcast that really talks about things that we come across every day that you wouldn't know the backstory of. Like they had a really interesting one time on curb cut, like the things on the corner that we think are like the little ridged dot things that I always thought were to keep wheelchairs from like crossing into the street, but it was also, or I thought they were for blind people to like, but it was like a whole story behind it, and I was completely wrong. But it's a design podcast that talks about how we engage pretty much with the world and the history and story behind those things that is very littly known. I don't even think that's a word, but you know what I mean.
Cool. We'll link both of those in the show notes. And I want to ask you next, what's your favorite culinary resources?
I would say my favorite culinary resources are most of the time cookbooks and design books, which doesn't seem to make sense, but it's very important, I feel, in like the aesthetic nature of creating a dish, especially if you're a very like creative person. And you don't necessarily create dishes in a traditional way, and there are stories behind them. I like to think of myself as a storyteller with food. So things like color theory books I look at, which I have a book that I highly recommend is The Secret Lives of Color. This woman did a research, I guess pretty much a research book on different colors, their names, and why they're named that way. And it gives a very interesting history through the entirety of the rainbow on why different colors like lead white and like silver and where silver came from. And, like talking about how in Greek mythology, they would say things like the wine red sea. And this was at a time like when the sea was first mentioned and the color of the sea was first mentioned in literature. It was mentioned as the wine Red Sea. And we know that the sea is not red, but what was wine like back then? So it kind of explored this whole history of language and color and how we see things today and what color means in food and also in history and how that is important in the stories that we tell. But yeah, that's why I think design is so important when we talk about food, and that's why I was like, I can't choose art or science because we need both to exist as creatives in the world and kind of shape the futures that we want.
Yeah. Cool.
That was not a fly answer. I'm so sorry. I'm like
sorry.
on the fly. Let me give you a long response.
If it's good, I'm not going to shut anybody up. So context is very important.
Yeah.
All right. How do you decompress?
Ooh, I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed. You know what I've been decompressing with lately? Like an old lady. I've been playing Candy Crush. I don't know where this came from. I played
chess to decompress. I'm like an old man. So my mom plays Candy Crush on her tablet, and I was always like, why did she do that? And I remember one day just being like, you know what, I'm gonna try it. And I tried it, and I was like, dang, these little vibrations and these little candy blocks, like, I get it. This is great.
There's nothing wrong. So I started playing Fortnite, which sounds ridiculous.
No.
But because, like, my son was so obsessed and he had never played, and he played at a friend's house, so I'm like, I'm going to see what this bullshit video game is.
Yes.
And then I'm like, nah, you're not playing this. And I was like, oh, I got like 10 minutes. Like, maybe I'll go on and go play this game for a few. So, like, I'll be in bed. My wife's like, you played Fortnite? I'm like, yeah, like, I worked like 15 hours today. I'm just going to go, like, do this game for like 15 minutes. And then like 1 a.m, I'm like, oh man, I need to shut this down.
I think it's one of those things where I feel like I'm constantly reading. Last year I read 21 books, constantly reading for fun and for research. I'm constantly engaging in these very political conversations. I'm constantly like doing all of these things that are very emotion filled and like politically charged and constantly having me thinking and reflecting. Sometimes you just want to do something that has sounds and fun colors and doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. And it's just like everything else I feel in my life has so much meaning and intention. Sometimes I just truly want to unplug and do something that's silly and something that's silly and not, full of like such intense thought, especially like in living in this crazy country that we live in right now. It's always something going on, so we're never away from like the issues of the day. So I think that a little silly video game is fine,
I love it. I get sucked into my silly little games of chess.
Yeah.
I play 1 minute games. It's so intense. And I'll do it for like an hour. Same way Fortnite, chess.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what's the best meal you've ever had?
Ooh, ever had? I don't know if I've had the best meal ever. I've had most memorable meals, but
What's the most memorable meal you've ever had? Just pick one.
The most memorable meal that I had, just pick one. The most memorable meal that I've ever had was, one of the most actually, was with, at Dookie Chase, with the late chef Leah Chase. And that was last year, actually. It was last February at the last and first Resistant Serve conference. And she was so fiery and full of life. And a few months later, she passed away. But she was hilarious, and the food was amazing, and she was still cooking in a wheelchair. Just elderly, amazing woman, and I don't know. It was meaningful and special to me and memorable because I knew that I was never going to experience that moment again. And I knew that the food that was being prepared for us was made from the heart. And it was her and Carla Hall. They did the dinner together because she was also at the conference. And in my mind also, I was like, she's in her later years. This might be my last time to experience this food. And I didn't think it was going to be a few months later that she would pass away. So it was it was really special. It was memorable for the emotional reasons, but also just, I don't know, the food was comforting and delicious, Yeah.
Cool. All right. And the last question that I have, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh my God.
It's not on the fly.
I want to be remembered as someone that tried. Someone that tried to make a difference in my community by being honest with myself and being honest with others, even if it wasn't something that they wanted to hear. Really standing by what I believed in and speaking up for others and speaking up when it came to injustice and unfairness and inequity. I want to be remembered as someone, not that I was a rabble rouser, but I want to be remembered as someone who
shook the table.
Who not even shook the table, but kicked the leg off when they was walking away to make their own, I think that a lot of people have this idea in my mind or in their mind of me based on how they've engaged with me online. They think that I am it's either good or bad. They think that I'm revolutionary and I speak out and I say these things and I'm creating all these beautiful dishes. And then you have people who are like, I'm a sore loser who didn't succeed in the traditional sense and is not a real chef and can't cook. And I think, and is an influencer. Mm-hmm. And I think that in a weird way, I could kind of be both of those things. And I'm actually fine with that. But I think I want to be remembered as someone who genuinely lived with and through food and didn't have any apologies about how I did that in a public way because it was my story to tell and not anybody else's. So I guess that's how I want to be remembered. And that was quick, I feel, based on all my other answers that I gave that were long dissertations. But that was pretty good.
I think you'll succeed at that. You're a real life influencer.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And that's the important thing. That's all we got. This conversation has been amazing. I think it's time now that we let everybody know where they can follow you and about your Patreon.
Oh, yes. Okay, so you can follow me on Instagram and on Facebook at Krystal C. Mack. That's Krystal C as in cat, Mack. And my Patreon, which I've just launched, if you want to support me monthly and support the programming that I create around food and social design, and the issues that we deal with that are connected to those things, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Krystal C. Mack, and you'll find ways you can support there. Even if it's just a one-time support, there's a link there that shows you where to support. Or if you could do a minimum of like $1 a month, which is literally like way less than like a Netflix subscription, and actually helps to support not only me but others in the food community that I work with. That would be amazing. And also my design studio is absence.of, and that's on Instagram as well. So
make sure you follow all of those, and we'll link all of it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Thank you, Krystal, so much for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Like and subscribe, and please leave us a review on whatever platform you listen on. If you have anything to say to us, you can email us at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. And we're going to sign off now. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.